We're finishing about the Kohen Gadol and his haircut. Remember? Kohen Gadol has to get a special haircut. I have to make mention, someone sent me this also. I should have said this before. We talked about the Kohen Gadol is limited to having one wife. It's especially halacha on Yom Kippur, v'chiper bado vad beito. His beito, not beitav, not his or batav, his houses, just his house. His house is his wife. That's a singular. I mentioned that there are some, like the Tosfos point out, that we have an explicit example of a Kohen Gadol who had two wives. It says, Vayisalo Yehoyada Nashim Shtayim. Yehoyada took two wives. And there's some there, Das Mikra says this is Pshat. It's talking about how Yehoyada installed Yehoash on the throne at the age of 7, as Yoni pointed out last week, not 6, at the age of 7. He was installed on the throne. And Yehoyada basically taught him how to be a king and how to be a man. And then it says, Vayisalo Yehoyada Nashim Shtayim. It means that Yehoyada arranged two marriages for him, for Yoash. It's an awkward language. Not only that, it should be in the Hifyil, but it's also this whole thing about, we talk about Nisuin. The verb Nisuin, which basically means an engagement or a marriage, it means a marriage, it strictly means marriage, is from the Shorish Nun Sin Aleph. Now, in the early biblical books, for example, the Torah and the Nevi'im, that verb is usually referring to something that is carried, either physically, literally, or metaphorically, figuratively, like the prophet carries the Masad Devar Hashem. Fine. In post-exilic Hebrew, we find that suddenly this verb is used for taking a wife. Normally, taking a wife, marriage, what's the verb used for that in the early biblical books? Kicha, lakachat, vayichu lahem, okay, vayikach isha. Or we have chitun, chet taf nun is the verb used for marriage. We find that that's why, for example, father-in-law is called a chotain, son-in-law is a chatan, and we have vayit chatain, that's earlier. The fact is that you find now this verb, marriage, vayisa, to lift, is as a verb used for marriage, indicates the lateness of the book, post-exilic. And that's, by the way, one of the proofs that for later dating for the book of Ruth, because it says right at the beginning of Ruth that Mahalon and Kilyon, it says why Yisulahem Nashim Moaviyot, they married for themselves Moabitess wives. Now this is talking about pre-Davidic times, so the verb should be Waikulahem. And the fact that it's using an Aramaism like this shows that the book was written later. There are those, by the way, Rishonim point this out, that even though the Gemara Bava Basra seems to say that Samuel wrote the book, good guess, that just because the Brisa gives the authorship for various biblical books doesn't mean it's the last, that's the final word. There are many classic Jewish Orthodox, I'm not talking about Bible critics and other people like that, and other sorts of kofrim. I'm talking about straight, proper Jewish interpreters who did not take this Bava Basra Brisa as the last word, okay, about the authorship of the various books. So obviously Divrei Yamim is a later book, because I'll attribute it to Ezra, who was a returning from Babylon. So you can understand why Ezra would use a verb like this. But either way, if it's talking about Yehoyada arranging a marriage for Yehoash, the young king, it should be Wayasilo Yehoyada. Yasi, okay? Or in regular Hebrew, would be Hisilo. Okay? It's a hifyil of arranged this marriage. But here, it's Pal, the Kal form. So that's why you can understand why some say, it means Yehoyada himself got married twice, and not that he arranged a marriage or two marriages for Yoash. So Richiyun, but that would explain if you do read the pasuk as saying that Yehoyada basically arranged two marriages for this young king. We don't have a problem of Yehoyada having multiple wives, because there's no verse that indicates Yehoyada had multiple wives. He's a Kohen Gadol, he's supposed to have one wife. Okay, so we follow the psak of the Rambam in that case. So Yehoyada knew about the psak of the Rambam, and he did not have more than one wife. Okay, let's put this away here. Let's start the 6th parak. I really like this idea because it tells us about what we're missing in the Beis HaMikdash. It says here, "Ef shar sheyeh korbanos shel adam karev, v'hu eino omed al gabav." It can't be. Doesn't mean impossibility, because we're going to see that it is possible. It's not right. By the way, this is Rambam's taking this straight from the Gemara. It talks about the Ma'amadot. It cannot be that a man's sacrifices offered in the temple, but he's not standing over and watching it being performed. He's supposed to be there. The korbanot tzibur hey korban shel kol Yisrael. The public sacrifices are the sacrifices of all Israel. V'efshar yu Yisrael kulano b'dim bazara b'shat korban. But it's also impossible that the entire Jewish people should be standing there in the temple courtyard at the time the sacrifice is offered. Klei HaMikdash 6th parak. Levichach tikenu neviim harishonim sheyivru miYisrael kesherim v'yirei chet yihyu shluchei kol Yisrael lamod ala korbanot. The early prophets therefore ordained that we seek out, select kosher Jews. Kosher means proper people who fear sin. They should be all of Israel's emissaries to stand over the sacrifices. Vehema nikrim anshe ma'amad. So they're called the men of the assembly. Ma'amad from the word omeid. They're standing over this. Now, by the way, early prophets. What does Nevi'im Rishonim mean? Early prophets. When the Rambam says it, or we have such a term like that in the Gemara, as opposed to Nevi'im Achronim, what are we referring to? So in grade school, you're taught Nevi'im Rishonim are the early books of the prophets. For whatever reason, you have Yoshua Shoftim, Shmuel and Malachim. Those are Nevi'im Rishonim. And Nevi'im Achronim are Yeshayahu, Yirmiyahu, Yechezkel, and the Treyasar. Right? That's what it's referring to. No, that's not true. It was printers. The same printers who decided that Samuel will be divided into two books, like the Book of Kings, but Yeshayahu, which is also quite long, shall not be divided in two, and who made determinations of where the chapters start and end, just because of convenience, also created this false distinction that those first four books of the prophets should be called Nevi'im Rishonim, and the latter four should be called Nevi'im Achronim. That is not a term or a system that the Rambam or anybody who preceded him, or even many people after him, recognized or even heard of. Instead, when the Rambam says Nevi'im Rishonim, he means as opposed to Nevi'im Achronim in his own language. Who are Nevi'im Achronim? The early Second Temple prophets, like Chagai, Zechariah, and Malachi. And Nevi'im Rishonim are the ones who are around at the beginning of First Temple times or even earlier. Shmuel Navi, for example. And whoever was around with King David. That's what the Rambam means when he says Nevi'im Rishonim. So when they talk about how earlier, a few parakim ago, the Even HaShtiyah was always right in the middle of the Holy of Holies since they built the first temple. It says the Nevi'im Rishonim. It means the Nevi'im who were present when David first laid the foundations for the first temple. For example, Nathan and Gad. God even showed him, okay, this is the final place. This is where God wants the temple. You knew the temple was somewhere supposed to be in the city. Now I'm showing you exactly where. Yeah, what was the question?
About this terminology.
Yeah.
So basically, everybody after Shiloni would not be Nevi'im Rishonim.
Maybe even that. That's a little bit gvuli. Basically, Nevi'im Rishonim are earlier prophets who set up the system, and the later prophets were the ones who reset the system. Okay.
But there's a large chunk who have
intermediate prophets. Micah the Morashite, Jonah. Oh, someone's here. Okay, I would consider them prophets. Okay, first temple prophets, but intermediate times. They're not Rishonim, not Achronim. Maybe anybody who's in the first temple is a Rishon, and the second temple is Achron. The point is, it is not the common term that you find in your grade school books. Okay, that's the point. And in this case, he does mean King David's time. This establishment of the system. They divide them in 24 groups, 24, assemblies. Just like you have 24 groups of Levites and priests on duty. Every assembly has a head, one guy in charge. Rosh HaMa'amad. Oh, well, look at that. Who'd have known that? The head of the Ma'amad is called the head of the Ma'amad. Okay. B'chol Shabbat with Shabbat. Every week. It doesn't mean the Saturday. It means every week. Mitkabetzin Hashem Ma'amad shel Ota Shabbat. The people of these Ma'amad that week gather together. Misha Hayam Mehan B'Yerushalayim O Karov La. One, if they were in Jerusalem itself or close to Jerusalem, Nichnasin LaMikdash im Mishmar Kuna Ulvia Shel Ota Shabbat. they would go into the temple at the same time that the Levitic watch and the priestly watch also enters the temple. Okay, they show up on Shabbos. Okay, those of this assembly who are too far to make it. Remember, travel. Let's say your mamad, it's only a week long. Sometimes traveling could take a week and maybe even extra week, and then you just missed it. So they didn't go. Kevan shegia mamad shelahem, when their week came, there's time for assembly. Hein mikabetzin levet knesset shebimkomon. They would gather together in their local synagogue. Synagogues are mentioned, by the way, already in Tehillim. This is something that I've tried to stress. Sefer Tehillim describes the destruction of the first Commonwealth. By first Commonwealth, I mean the times of Shiloh. The temple was destroyed. The temple at Shiloh was destroyed. The Jewish Commonwealth was destroyed and it was conquered. And many Jews went into exile at the hands of the Philistines when the Jews became strangers in their own land. You read between the lines in many of the Psalms from that era, and they describe how the Philistines destroyed all the Moadei El. If you read, by the way, some people say a lot of these films, which describe basically a Churban-like atmosphere, are prophetic. The Asaph and the Bnei Korach and David HaMelech himself are talking about a future Churban. Yes, it applies to a future Churban, but they're actually describing things that their fathers had seen themselves. The Churban that the Philistines had wrought on the land before eventually King David arose, who was basically the template for a Messiah. And it mentions that they would destroy synagogues. Basically, the fact that Jews would gather together in a place to worship is something that's quite ancient. And you can understand the only thing that God told you was where you have a place of worship of God, make sure it stays strictly prayer and do not offer sacrifice there. Otherwise, you've converted into a bama and now it's forbidden. And apparently, the entire time that Shiloh was standing, the Jews kept to this commandment. Unlike the times of the first temple where the prohibition of making a bama was the problem. Every king is judged that he do away with these other places of sacrificial worship. In the times of the judges, the Jews are not faulted. Yes, there were times of outright idolatry. They were backsliding to outright idolatry. But at least the place they worship God, there was no sacrifice there. So they stuck to it, which means that they had just places of worship of God. Just like, by the way, what we did on Yom Tov. Was that a shul? It's a place of worship. Yeah, a lot of places. Remember, Chazal said Beit Knesset doesn't have to be 4 walls and a roof. Many generations, Beit Knesset means a certain area in the open where they pray. As a matter of fact, on fast days and on Purim and things like that, when you expected large crowds at prayer, you'd have to pray where? Out in the Shuk, in the Rehov Ha'ir, in the open space. That's the ideal place for prayer. And it says also in the Sefer Divrei Yamim and in Melachim that when they had to pray at the temple, where did they pray? In the open courts of the temple. Chatzros Beis Hashem. Open areas. That's more of a traditional synagogue setting. Unless the European style roof and 4 walls and, lahavdil. Try not to imitate our Gentile neighbors. And by the way, that's by what we said a few times ago, that what Micah's shul, Micah, not the Morashite, who was the prophet, Micah, who was from not Michai ben Gimla, he was a prophet. Talking about Micah from the early judges' times, who took the money from his mother, who dedicated. She said, "I want to make for God." So they made a pesel and masecha, and the Danites eventually took his pesel and set up in Dan. What they had was basically a synagogue. There was one shtibel in Eretz Yisrael, all the way at the far north of the country, the northernmost city that basically marked this is the end of the country, Dan, the northernmost part of the country. If you had walked into the shul there, you know what we would have seen? A figure about this big, right in front, next to the Aron Kodesh. That was the sole problem in the times of the judges. There was one shul that had a graven image because the people didn't know better. They said it was dedicated to God. It wasn't a Baal. It wasn't some foreign deity. They weren't doing Avodah Zarah necessarily. That was the biggest complaint that they could have had. That was a big problem. Which implies that all the other places of godly worship in the times of the judges were kosher. Why? It was just a place where Jews got together and prayed and read the Torah, like we always do today. Okay, so now you have to ask this question. The Rambam said the whole point of the Mamad. Oh my God. There are 3 Batei Medrash surrounding that square. They're 3 batei medrash, Okay. Anyways, what was I trying to say? The Rambam just said, what's the point of the ma'amad? Ask the question. It can't be that the people are not standing over their sacrifice, right? Someone brings a sacrifice. He should be attending to it. He should be watching the Kohen perform the sacrifice. It's his sacrifice. And therefore, the early prophets ordained that there always be someone present in the temple to represent the Jewish people as a whole at the sacrifice. And these people called ma'amadot. And then it says, if the ma'amad can't make it to the temple, so they gather in the synagogue. If they're gathering in the synagogue in their own hometown and they're not in the temple, so what have they accomplished? There's a minyan in shul also. There's a minyan in every shul in the morning. Why not just call the minyan the ma'amad? I thought the ma'amad is supposed to be in the temple. Well, you guys understand the question? So what does the ma'amad accomplish? And the answer is, we're going to see in the coming rules. Hold on 1 second. Oh my God. Is that a guy's car horn, or is he just playing a trumpet outside? Let's close the windows. It's so loud, it's coming through the window. Oh, geez. Okay. I'd like to offer that soon we're going to see the answer to this. The ma'amad isn't just a minyan in the shul, in, let's say, in Katzrin or in Ma'ale Giboah or something like that, where they're davening that Sunday and Monday, and that covers the temple sacrifice. These people actually have to fast, and they have to spend the entire day in shul. They have to be focused. Which just goes to tell you that it's less about the physical place and more about the intentions. When we daven shacharis in the morning, we're asking, we're doing what we have to do. We have to worship God, and therefore we have to train ourselves to praise Him and request our daily needs, and then to thank Him, right? That's what the essence of prayer is. Praise God, request, because we have to teach ourselves to request, and then we have to thank. That is a regular prayer. The Anshe Ma'amad have to do something much more than that. They have to represent Am Yisrael. They're basically the ones who have the entire weight of the world on their shoulders. They have to fast. They have to read the Torah all day. They have to be focused entirely on this act of, like we said on Rosh Hashanah, they're sacrificing, they're giving his entire mind to God. Why? When you have, let's say, a weekday, you're asking for parnasa, you're asking for refuah, you're asking for all the things we have in Shemon Esrei. Those are mundane requests. A person who dedicates his mind to God on a full-time basis is on an entirely different level. That's what they're supposed to be trying to do. So even if they can't make it to the temple, whatever they're supposed to do in the temple, they could do in their local synagogue. He's going to explain. So what do they do? Is it just a minyan? No, it's not. Whether they're in Jerusalem or in synagogues. They fast on their Monday. They don't fast on Sunday. They also fast Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Now, normally, because I'll say if you have an emergency and you have to ordain a fast or fast days, what do? You do that Sunday, you do it Monday, Thursday, etc. Do you do 2 straight days of fast?
No.
Why? What's wrong with fasting 2 straight or 4 straight days, as it implies here? It's actually quite hard on the body. Matter of fact, I've seen certain people have this. Certain Gentiles have taken upon themselves to fast many days in a row, and it really riles them up and gets them crazy. We've seen such a phenomenon.
Yeah.
Here in Israel, we have such a thing. So obviously, these type of people who are picked for the Ma'amad can handle such a thing. Doesn't mean 3-4 straight days of complete fast. It means they eat at night. Valberev Shabbos lo yumasanin. On Friday, they do not fast. Mipnei kavod Shabbos. That's an affront to the Sabbath. In Eruvin, they discussed this. If a person were fasting for a while, going into Shabbos all fasted, so that's an affront to the honor of Sabbath, because he comes in, he's mi'uneh, he's basically suffering, and then he'll eat a Shabbos meal. It's not going to be for ta'anug, it's going to be like, well, you remember you broke your fast last night. I remember when I was younger, had to learn. You break your fast, take it slow, right? It's not exactly the most enjoyable meal necessarily. For many people, it's like a shock, okay? So it's not right to go into Shabbos fasting, which is why there were Tanoim who basically felt, and this debate, by the way, that many poskim hold, this is brought by the Beis Yosef, let's say you have a fast day Erev Shabbos. There were many Tanaim who felt you're not supposed to fast until Shabbos. What you have to do is break your fast sometime in the afternoon. Yeah, fast after Chatzos. And then whatever time, at Plag HaMincha, whatever, break your fast so that you go into Shabbos, you go to Kabbalah Shabbos, you're already not fasting. And then there's those who hold Mashlim. And Mashlim isn't the way, let's say, you were told last time Asar B'Tevis was on Friday, meaning you have to accept Shabbos and daven and come home at Seis and when it's already dark and then break your fast. Mashlim meant that you have the ability, if you want, you have the right to choose, or the community can choose to fast until Shabbos comes in. But it doesn't mean everybody has to. They could decide we're not mashlimin. And even when they said mashlimin, yes, maybe you are supposed to fast until Shabbos really starts. Once you accept Shabbos, fast is over. So if you accepted early Shabbos, you've killed the fast. And it doesn't mean you have to wait until really nightfall to break your fast. And it never meant nightfall either way, unless it was Tisha B'Av or Yom Kippur. When was the fast officially over? Shkia. So I've been pointing this out to people. You could just read the Beis Yosef. None other than the author of Shulchan Aruch points all these facts out. And I thought it was scandalous. I don't know why. For many years I've been telling people, Asar B'Teves fell on a Shabbos. Telling people. There are many times said, break your fast 3 o'clock in the afternoon so you don't start Shabbos. We don't hold that way. We say mashlimin. But is mashlimin an option? We say mashlimin, you have the option to continue eating, to continue fasting, or do you have to continue fasting? Fine, they say you have to continue fasting until Shabbos starts. So I tell them, yeah, but when you accept Shabbos early, it's over. The Mishneh Berurah mentions this. The Beis Yosef mentions this. This is the psak of the Shulchan Aruch. Yet they write in the calendars, no, you can't take in Shabbos early. You gotta push through to the end, and you can't end the fast at Shkia like the Gemara says, because we hold like Rabbeinu Tam, and no one knows what Rabbeinu Tam Shkia is. So you have to take it out at Seis. We've gone back to not doing Rabbeinu Tam, so now it's still the Luach still says it Seis. Yesterday, people were asking me, when's the fast over? Beis Yosef, it's the first simon in Hilchot Tainis says. The only reason why I'd say the fast is over at Seis is because we hold like Rabbeinu Tam, and we don't know when his Shkia is. It's supposed to be Shkia. So we just say Seis. It's only a few minutes later anyways. But we don't hold like Rabbeinu Tam. We know when Seis is. We know when Shkia is. So the fast is over at Shkia, unless it's, of course, Tisha B'Av or Yom Kippur. All these things have been, I don't know why, erased by the Luach makers. So if the fast is over, anybody asks you, your daughter asks you, when's the fast over? It's over at Shkia. She doesn't daven Marav. She doesn't have to go to Marav. It's Shkia. That's it. The sun sets. The fast is over. And Chazal said as much. The Vilna Gaon points this out. Tosfos points this out. The Beis Yosef says it. This is Shulchan Aruch. This isn't some wild, let's say, sometimes you're only going to hear this in a shiur on Machon Shilo's channel. If you look this up, you can find this yourself in all this farm. Okay, it's scandalous. What are you going to do? So, what?
People posting by the Siddur and the Luach, not the Shulchan Aruch and the Gra.
Oh, the Shulchan Aruch, but the Shulchan Aruch is just quoting Shas. Okay, who knows? I don't know. I remember, saw one guy, he actually wrote this, says, Grossman says that you can end the Asar B'Teves by taking in Shabbos early. Who ever heard of a thing like that? Well, yeah, because he was looking Hilchos Tainis for that halacha. That halacha that you could take in Shabbos and Asar B'Teves is over is in Hilchos Shabbos. Okay, so you don't know how to read. It's unfortunate because it's an explicit Beis Yosef, Mishneh Berurah mentions it twice, but whatever. Hey, if only people would study what's there, and then they would, they wouldn't have such problems. It says here that basically the Anshe Mamad are not supposed to fast because it's not Kvod Shabbos. Uve Echad b'Shabbos Einu Misanim. Also Sunday they don't fast. Why? Kudei shelo yetzu me'onek Shabbos l'tzom. It's also a shock on the system. You go from onek Shabbos to suddenly, eating well until eating nothing. Which, by the way, it's a good question. So why are we doing that with Rosh Hashanah? We eat well on Rosh Hashanah, and then the next day we have a fast day. A little bit of a shock. Okay. Next, Uvchol Yom Vayom MiShabbos Shehi Ma'amadon. Every day of the week, that is their assembly. Mithpalim Arba Tfiloth. This is a machlokas rishonim. What 4 prayers do they pray? Very interesting. Shacharit u'mincha u'nilah. Not Marv, by the way. Marv doesn't correspond to any actual temple service because there's no korban that's ordained for nighttime. It's just the leftovers. There's the morning sacrifice, the morning prayer, the afternoon prayer, and ni'ilah, the closing of the gates, just like we have on a public fast day. V'od mosifin. What's the short of that? Musaf comes to this. Mosifin. We add tefillah cheret bein shacharit u'mincha, between shachar and mincha. Sounds like musaf to me. adding a prayer between, what do we call the additional prayer between Shacharis and Mincha? Oh. Okay. We add a prayer then. By the way, it sounds like Musaf, but the Rambam's not going to call it Musaf. He says here, V'hi yatira lahen. And this prayer is, more than that. It's an additional prayer. So we basically used a Hebrew word here, which is a synonym for Musaf. It's the Yetera prayer. But he's not calling it Musaf. It's a Musaf by another name. V'nosein kapehana kohanim. Hold on, I can't see the screen here. V'nosein kapehana kohanim. And the kohanim lift up their hands. This lifting up the hands is a verb, meaning what? The priestly blessing. Why? Because in order to pronounce the priestly blessing, they're supposed to lift up their hands. The mamad, they do this at the assembly. Shlosha pamim b'chol yom, 3 times a day. B'shacharit, uvitfilah zo hayitira, this extra prayer, basically the musaf of the mamad, and the ne'ilah. But they don't do it at mincha. Why don't they do this at mincha? Why is there no nisiyas kapayim at mincha? I don't get it. Everybody's fasting anyways. The Kohanim are part of this mamad. They're all stuck in the synagogue or in the temple. They're not eating all day. So why don't they could duchen at okay? So the answer is in Hilchos Tefillah of the Rambam. This is basically everybody holds like this except for the Chazon Ish famously. The general rule, the way they understand the Gemara is like this: the Kohanim are supposed to duchen at every time during the day. They're supposed to duchen. By that's a Yiddish word meaning go up on the stage where they lift up their hands and bless the people.
Wait, that's a Yiddish word?
Duchenin?
No, I've seen this for
the duchan. No, duchan is a word from Chazal. It's not a Hebrew word. It's actually bought, I think, from the Greek. It means the upper place, like a bama. It's what's called a bama, or like the madrega, or the ma'alah in Hebrew. It's called a duchan. Duchenin is a Yiddish word that comes from this word that's in Chazal. It's like davening. Okay, leinin. What's leining? And in English, we add the ing to the end because that's how our verbs end. So you say davening instead of davening. In Yiddish, it's davening, and in English, it's davening, right? And leinin is reading the Torah, and leining is an anglicized form of the Yiddish leinin. And duchenin, or duchening, is anglicized or Yiddishized from this. So I used the Yiddishism when I said that. Okay? Yeshivishism. The Kohanim are supposed to bless the people. The point is the Kohanim are supposed to pronounce a priestly blessing at, let's say, on a regular weekday at Shacharis and Mincha. However, as Al said, by the time you get to Mincha, the Kohanim have probably eaten something, and they've probably had a cup of wine with their food. So they are now considered halachically shikur, inebriated, and they should therefore not be saying the priestly blessing. What about a fast day like yesterday? We had a fast day. At least most people had a fast day. And we're not worried about drunkenness. As a matter of fact, the Kohanim are going to say the priestly blessing at Ne'ilah. The sages said they shouldn't raise their hands and bless the people at the ordinary afternoon service, even on the fast day, because people confuse and think that the din is that on any day there's mincha, they should raise their hands and bless the people. So in order not to confuse the people, they don't duchen at mincha on a fast day. Wait a minute, but I went to shul, they did. They make a distinction. If mincha is early in the day, that's a regular mincha. That could lead to confusion. If mincha is already late in the day, it's like ne'ilah now. Basically, they say there's what to argue about, how late in the day, but basically the cutoff line is plag. If your mincha, the fast day, is after plag, it's like a ne'ilah, and Kohanim can raise their hands in ne'ilah. And this is going to happen this coming Yom Kippur. On Yom Kippur, we're going to have duchenin at Nisiyas Kapayim, at Shacharis and Musaf, but not at mincha, and then again at ne'ilah. But by the way, if a Kohen gets up, the halacha says in a few places, also twice in Shulchan Aruch, and the Rambam has it, where he quotes the Rambam. If at mincha on a fast day, like Yom Kippur or Tzum Gedai, whatever it is, it's a mincha early in the day, the Kohen actually gets up and he's ready to do the priestly blessing, we go ahead with it. We don't tell the Kohen, get down. No, we're not going to do it. We go ahead with it. So that's the basic thing. And the Chazon Ish basically said, all mincha, even on a fast day, they duchen, which is either minhag and b'nei brak, is on the fast day, whatever mincha it is, whatever time mincha is, and mincha on Yom Kippur, they duchen, basically. I've never seen it, but that's what I'm told. Okay. This also leads us to an issue that is important to talk about before Yom Kippur, and that is, did you ever see this issue of that they have to make sure to get in the priestly blessing before sundown at Nila. You heard this. Okay, what's that all about? What do you know? Do you know anything about this? Do you remember this, Shmuel? Did you see this happen? That they're trying to get this in? I'll give you the basic story up until this point. What happened? Everything I knew about before this year, and now the newer issues that I'm surprised I didn't think about beforehand. Here's how it goes. The Achronim mentioned this. It's mentioned by Magen Avraham and others that the Kohanim are not supposed to be raising their hands to bless the people at night. The cutoff between night and day is sundown. Where they get this from? Well, it's not explicit in Chazal anywhere, but they understood it. Why? Because the Kohanim work in the temple until when? Sundown. All the services are over. There's no such thing as a priestly service after sundown. That's the cutoff point. Blessing the people is a priestly service, and therefore it's also not supposed to be after sundown. Okay, makes sense. So Ne'ilah is a prayer, by the way, that precedes Mariv. Basically, what do you call it? I made a joke. Yes, you could daven Shachris after noon, after Chatzot, just not Shachris anymore. What is it? It's called Mincha. Okay, and if you daven Mincha after nightfall or after sundown, what is it? It's Mariv. So Ne'ilah is a prayer it's a day prayer. It's supposed to be, like I said, when the sun is at the top of the trees, but not after sundown, because then it would be Mariv time. So we try to get in the priestly blessing as part of the Ne'ilah, which is basically as Yom Kippur is ending, before the sun goes down. This isn't Chazar Sashatz. Now, I looked in don't forget, you can interrupt if you have a question.
How come we used to say Ne'ilah on all fast days, didn't we? And now we only say it on...
Yeah, because we don't consider, it's only a public fast day when they gather for prayer. And we basically hold that let's say, even Tisha B'Av isn't a public, doesn't have that status, the halachic status of a public fast day.
Really?
Yeah, the rabbis point this out a few times. If it was a public fast day, there'd be a lot more rules in play. These are just a minhag ba'alma, like the Rambam says. Okay? Ratzu, lo ratzu. Depends on the will of the people. No, it's almost, they institute a lot of the prohibitions, but still not exactly. It's still not a Tainus Tzibur. If it was a Tainus Tzibur, we'd have to have the prayer convocation and the whole thing with the Sefer Torah in the town square and the various prayers and slichas and stuff. But we don't do that on Tisha B'Av. General rule, ein Tanit Tzibur bevavel. Okay? In the Gullus, they don't do this Tainus Tzibur thing anymore. That's described in the Gemara of Tainus. Technically speaking, if chas v'shalom, and this shouldn't happen in our lifetimes, there were real emergency, a real plague, not a manufactured politicians and media personality plague where they want to experiment on everybody plague, okay? An actual plague, chas v'shalom, or a real terrible war, or something, natural disasters, then we would have the instituted Monday, Thursday fast days, and then the halachas would be as described in the Gemara, okay? Should never happen. The point is, at Ne'ilah, what are we trying to do? We are trying to finish Chazar Sashatz, get in that Birkat Kohanim before the sun goes down. Here's the problem. I looked in my Birnbaum Art Scroll Machzer, and what is it for the Ashkenazic rite? What does Ne'ilah consist of? It's all packed into the Chazar Sashatz. There's the Vidui, that's to be said by the Tzibur, and the Slichas are now in Chazar Sashatz, like right in the middle. So the way it used to work in New York, for example, was they start Ne'ilah an hour before sundown. By the time the rabbi gets to the Sim Shalom and the part where the Kohanim would be duchening, but it's America, so they don't duchen, it's basically already dark out. And all that's left for him is to say, Oseh Shalom, Avinu Malkeinu, Hashem Melech, sound the shofar, Kaddish Tiskabel, and we're done. 5 more minutes. And he's timed it, I remember, phenomenally. The rabbi promised at his sermon, we're going to sound the shofar at 6:45, and he stuck to it. My brother remembers that very well. Okay? So it's going to take an hour. He got up there, starts with Ashrei, it's going to be an hour for Ne'ilah. So the end of the Chazar Sashatz is well after the sun has set. So we weren't trying to get in the end of the Chazar Sashatz with Birkat Kohanim before sunset in America or in Lita. Why? Because we're not having duchenin anyways. And all that's left, like I said, after the Sim Shalom part is Avinu Malkeinu, some psukim, sound the shofar, go home. But now we're back in Eretz Yisrael. What is the minhag, thank God? We have Birkat Kohanim like the Sfardim. But now we're still using a machzer that's Ashkenazic. So what do? We rush through Ne'ilah, the Chazaras HaShatz, with all its slichus and vidui and everything, just to make sure that we get to Sim Shalom and the Birkat Kohanim before the sun goes down. And we make it, let's say, just across the line. Oseh Shalom, Avreichas Amoy Yisrael B'Shalom, Amen. Sun goes down. Shkoyach. Now we have at least 20 minutes before shofar blowing. We have 20 minutes for Avinu Malkeinu. That's all that's left. Oh, we're going to say Hashem Hu Elokim, right? 20 minutes. More than 20 minutes. Maybe it's called for shofar blowing 25 minutes after sundown. Right? So what do? Have you been through a minyan like this before? When I first came to Israel, the rabbi already knew about this problem and followed what the Magen Avraham and the Chafetz Chaim already said to do in such a case, because they already knew about this issue. What a lot of shuls then do is, we raced through the actual prayer of the Ilah. What is the prayer of the Ilah? The Amidah. 2 Amidas. There's the Amidah B'Lachash, and there's the Chazar Sashatz Amidah, correct? Those 2 Amidas. That's what they call the Ikar. That's the main part of the tefillah. But in order to get it through, get it to Shkia, we basically zip through it. Great. Zipping through davening is 100% saying you should do. No, that's the opposite. Should say you should make sure, better to say less, like the rabbi always says, less words, more kavanah, say it clearly. Have you gained anything by adding a lot of piyutim to your Shmon Esrei or Chazar Sashatz and then having to zip through it and no kavanah? Or you say less piyutim so that the chazan could say every single word, so that even an old Holocaust survivor lady in the women's section could say this is the first time she heard every word of Chazar Sashatz and understood what the Shatz was saying. And she has a hearing aid. Yeah, and then you could go home and sing piyutim with your kids. I tell you, this happened to us a few times. Always there's some really old person who comes and says, it's the first time I heard Chazar Sashatz, which is exactly what it is. It was a repetition of the Shmon Esrei that's in the Machzer, and I heard it, and I understood it, and it sounded good. Who'd have known that Chazar Sashatz was actually Chazar Sashatz? Who'd have known? Okay. So they zip through it. So what do? Now they have, let's say, like I said, sun just went down. They have all the time until shofar blowing and Mariv, and the fast is over for Avinu Malkeinu. Avinu Malkeinu, I looked in the Machzer. It's spaced. It's very quick. How do you extend Avinu Malkeinu? So you say it really slowly. Avinu. That's not proper davening. Just like you're not supposed to zip through. Saying something too slow. By the way, you wouldn't do that. If you were given an audience with the new King of England, if you spoke disrespectfully too fast or you mumbled, that's not right. But if you also talk like you're a tortoise or something, and you're stuck in slow-mo, that's also not respectful. You should talk to God like a mensch, right? So that's what they do. So what is the genius idea that the Mishneh Berurah brings down? Great idea. Daven Ne'ilah and Chazar Sashatz and get to Birkas Kohanim before the sun goes down and take out from the Chazar Sashatz the slichus, etc., and say those after Chazar Sashatz, like slichus are normally done on a fast day, like let's say Shavasar B'Tammuz, where you say slichus and Tachanunim and Avinu Malkeinu after Chazar Sashatz, like the Sephardim have always done. Brilliant idea, by the way. This radical idea of the Mishneh Berurah is brought from the Magen Avraham. And these aren't lightweights. These aren't new things, and that's what you should do. And it's brilliant. And that way, the Ashkenazim were still using these art scroll in Burma upstairs. Now they use the Rinat Yisrael Siddur, which is basically art scroll but entirely Hebrew and has an extra big kametz for the kametz cotton. For some reason, in the Rinat Yisrael, the kametz cotton is extra big. I thought it's kametz cotton. Yeah, I know. It boggles the mind, but that's what he felt. Okay, and that's what you should do. It's brilliant. Why? Because now you could get to the Birkat Kohanim certainly before sundown, and you don't have to have a lopsided Chazar Sashatz, which is at warp speed, and Avinu Malkeinu, which is the tortoise speed. It's much more balanced. That was what I was thinking for 20 years, 22 years. This is the way I thought. Why? Because this is what I was taught. This is the way they do it. And then I realized, wait a minute, but who said Birkat Kohanim has to be before sundown? Yes, Achronim do make that argument, but it's a very weak argument if you're saying you need Talmudic proof for such a thing. You're skeptical also. I would think, let's say, maybe if you started Ne'ilah, like any other thing, just like we were eating on Shabbos, Shalosh Shudas, And now it's well after sundown. The stars have come out. We continue our meal. We're going to say the grace after meals. We're going to say the grace as though it was Shabbos, because that's when we started. So you can start your Shmona Esrei, Mincha, anytime, like yesterday. If they started Mincha well before sundown, the Chazar Sashatz went a little bit late, and now the Kohanim are getting up right after the sun went down. Is it such a big deal that they would say the priestly blessing at this point? And to be honest, even though there are Achronim who said, yeah, you should try to have the priestly blessing before sundown, it turns out there are many who also say, in Ben Hashmashas, it's also okay. It's okay to be a little bit late. So if you missed the cutoff point, no biggie. The only thing I could argue is, it is obvious that Birkat Kohanim should not be at night. Why? Because then Rambam in the postscript would have said, there's Birkat Kohanim at Mariv. But there is no Birkat Kohanim at Mariv. Why is there no Birkat Kohanim at Mariv? Because that's not the time. And we said, if you were saying a prayer after sundown, that prayer is Mariv. Okay, so that's how you know. That is the basis for the rule, which means that, by the way, like I said, if your prayer is going a little bit late, it's not so bad if the Kohanim get up to Duchin, as they say, I don't know, just a few minutes after the sun went down. If it's actually nighttime, maybe you have a problem already, because they start Chazar Sashatz 20 minutes before sundown. It's taken 40 minutes. So now it's well after Tzedek Kochavim. Really, the Kohanim shouldn't be getting up at that point. Now it's already pushing it. But then again, you should make sure that your Ne'ilah or Mincha on a regular day should not go past sundown. Chazar Sashatz of a Mincha that goes past sundown is already an negligent act. You're supposed to start Chazar Sashatz of Ne'ilah or as Mincha, as it may be, well before sundown, so that you don't get to this point where, oh, you got to the end just after sundown. That's a negligent act. So you have a little bit of leeway. But lichatchila, to plan that your Ne'ilah, the Chazar Sashatz of Ne'ilah should go well past sundown, that is wrong. Okay? Which is why you should still do this idea of the Mishneh Berurah that he brings, which is try to finish the Chazar Sashatz of Ne'ilah before sundown, or with sundown, as it may be, right about sundown. And all the prayers that you want to have in the time between, in Ben Hashmashot, between sundown and Tzeit, before you sound the shofar, save those for the afterwards. You could take some of the slichas out of the Chazar Sashatz and put them with the Vina Malkeinu. That's perfectly fine. It's recommended by these poskim. And that's what we're going to do on Yom Kippur, by the way. God willing. Yeah, you have a question about that?
It is to have a precise.
Well,
It's not that Birkat Kohanim needs to be during the day. It's that Sim Shalom needs to be during the day.
it's that the prayer, the Amidah, whether it be a personal Amidah or Chazarat Hashatz, should be during the day. Okay, that's all. And it's wrong to intentionally plan that our Amidah, which is the last prayer of the day, whether it's Ne'ilah or Mincha, whatever the case may be, it's wrong to already make it lechatchila that we're going to have a significant part of that prayer after the proper time for the prayer. You know, it's like starting Kriyas Shema when? A minute before Sof Zman Kriyas Shema. Come on. So you're not going to finish Kriyas Shema on time. If you did that with your kids or something like that, you're barely on time. You have 1 minute left. Okay, but it takes 20 minutes to do whatever you have to do. Okay, you arrange something. Oh, this. It's Chatayin Animas Kirayom. Said you'll take your wife somewhere. You had a nice 4-hour block. Okay, it was a Friday. You had from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. to take your wife somewhere. Okay, so just give her 4 hours. And what happened? You know, you only got going at noon. Shkoyach. What do you mean? We had a whole hour. No, that's not nice. You're not. You know, it's not gonna lead to shalom bias that way. Okay, so you have to be smart. Okay, let's see the rest of this. Anybody? I think someone online. No one. The people at home have a question. So we'll go on with the halachot. Yeah. So this is basically explains what the mamadot are doing and why it is that they don't have Nesiya Kapayim at the Mamad at the Mariv, because the Mamad doesn't have Mariv, because the Mamad is supposed to have prayers that correspond to when the temple is open, and the temple is not open at Mariv time. And the Mamad has no Birkat Kohanim at Mincha specifically, because basically the halacha is you're never supposed to have Birkat Kohanim at any Mincha, even on a fast day. Oh, but what about Ne'ilah? That's after Mincha. the Kohanim weren't drunk at Neilah. Of course, they're not drunk at Mincha. No, the sages said that so as not to confuse people, we never have birkat when you Mincha, unless Mincha really looks like a Neilah at the end of the day, like yesterday. Okay, now let's now we're clear with that. Let's get back to the Hilchot here. It says here, the Korim b'Sefer Torah shlosha anashim pa'amayim b'chol yom. We read the Sefer Torah, 3 people, 3 aliyahs, because it's a weekday, and we read the Torah twice. By the way, it's also going to be a machlokes, the Rishonim. You can see there's a Ravad here. It says here, let's read the Ravad. Omar Avraham, Ein yodeh mahu shamar v'hi yatei lahem. Rambam describes an extra service between Shachris and Mincha, correct? And he calls it, it's a Mincha, it's a Mosifin, a prayer that's Yitera. Sounds like Musaf by another name. Ravad says, I don't know what he means when he says V'hi Yitera lahen. It's an extra prayer. Shani motza'a ela b'yom sheish bo musaf V'hi Yitera l'chol Yisrael v'ina b'chol yom. I've only seen an extra prayer between Shachris and Mincha, which is called Musaf. And that is something that all Jews do in addition. He's using the Rambam's own words. I think it's almost tongue-in-cheek. I know about Musaf, which is Yetera of Shachris and Mincha, for all of Israel on days when they're supposed to be Musaf. Corresponding to what, by the way? When are you supposed to have an extra prayer between Shachris and Mincha, a Musaf? When there's a Korban Musaf in the temple. And he says that they're supposed to have 4 tefillas. What's the Ravad implying here? You read what the Korain says. They paraphrase him. It says here, Das Aravid in Rashi, Vod Rishoni, how you mitpalim michol yom rak shalosh tefilot. See, Ravid's following the Rashi and his understanding. The Ma'amad doesn't have any extra Musaf prayer. The Ma'amad just prays Shachris, Mincha, and Ne'ilah. He not necessarily because he's following Rashi, just like he's in Rashi's footsteps. He's a generation after Rashi. Okay, so he follows.
They were from different parts of Israel.
I know that nothing. Ravid doesn't quote Rashi, just like the Rambam never quotes Rashi really, although he does seem to mention Rashi in his Paris and Mishnayos to knock him down.
Wait,
No.
I was actually wondering this. This might be a really stupid question, but do they even know?
Hold on, Shmuel.
exists? They
There's
could
no
actually-
such thing as stupid questions. Only stupid people.
All right. Do they even know Rashi exists at this point?
So Rashi was getting out. Rashi's Perush was popularized by his descendants.
Right.
The Rambam addresses certain ideas that are very attributable to Rashi. For example, the whole thing about Sefer Refuot and what Rashi's belief was. The Rambam in Paris Mishnayos, I'm pointing to a copy of Paris Mishnayos up there, although I have it right here. No, I don't. It's in Zroyim. It's in Psachim, where the Rambam seems to be saying, I heard in the name of someone that this is pshat with what Chizkiyahu Melech did, and I can't believe that. That's nonsense. That's what the Rambam says about one of Rashi's ideas. And then it's a trivia question that they ask, how often is Rambam mentioned by the Tosafists? There's like 4 places in Shas where Rambam's explicitly mentioned. Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon. I forget them. I always forget it because I'm not a bucky in Tosfos enough, and I every year I remind myself where it is, and then I forget. So, but you should know the Tosafists were aware of Rambam to a certain extent, and Rambam seems to be aware of their ideas. Okay, Tosafistic ideas, the Rambam basically here and there he addresses specifically when he disagrees with, let's say, the Rif or things he got from his own father. Where does it go? It goes Rif, Rimigash, Maimon, Rambam. So when Rambam wants to majorly disagree with anybody from, let's say, that line or from any of the Gaonim, the Rambam says explicitly there are Gaonim who say this. The Rif says this. You know, my father, I disagree with him on this point. The Rambam mentioned that explicitly. And other times he'll just say there are other places where they do like this, and I disagree. He seems to be addressing the Western school. Okay, and Rambam scholars can probably tell you more about this. My point here is there are others who basically say, like we just read the Ravad here, who say that the Rambam is misunderstanding the source material, that the Ma'amad doesn't have 4 prayers a day. The Ma'amad has just 3. And only when there's Musaf, an actual Musaf for Am Yisrael, does the Ma'amad also have this Yetera prayer. Okay? Make sense? And then the Rambam continues. So when do they read the Torah? Now that we're clear about how many prayers they say, which we're not clear. It's basically, we'll wait till they rebuild the temple and they establish the Ma'amadot anew. Will they have Mamadot like Rambam style or Rashi Ravid style. Okay. With regards to the tefillin, the machlok is Rambam agrees with Rashi and Ravid's against them. Okay. But in this case, it's Ravid's with Rashi and Rambam's against them. Okay. So let's see this. Where are we reading here? They read the Torah twice a day. B'shachris u'vatfilah zo hayitirasha mosifin. When do they read the Torah? At Shachris and at this extra prayer that they add. Okay. See, once again, the Rambam saying this extra prayer that's added. He calls it the Yatera that they add. Musaf by another name. And the Ravid would say, what are you talking about? That prayer doesn't exist. Aval b'mincha lo ayu korin b'sefer. At mincha, they don't actually read the Torah. Instead, el al pek korin shema. Just like, technically speaking, Kriyat Shema is a reading of the Torah, correct? But because we do it twice a day every day, we know it so well, we are not obliged to go to the Aron, take out a Sefer Torah, read Shema straight out of the Torah. Anything you say nor often enough, you could say by heart. So too, by the time it comes to the third Torah reading of the day, they don't have to take out the Sefer Torah. I guess they use their Birkon card, or they just say it by heart. Yeah, you have your Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, or you can invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement. So you have this. They basically would use that. V'lo yu mitkabetzin latfilat mincha be'erev Shabbos, mipnei shehein trudin laShabbat. There's no mamad already in the afternoon of erev Shabbos. Not only they're not fasting, there's no mamad in the afternoon because look, you gotta get ready for Shabbos. No other time. So let's read what the Ravad says about this prayer, this reading the Torah at the second prayer. He says, Amar Avram, Zoat tefillah shina shamarim tefillah musafhu kemosha nusovrim lama marsha korin ba shlosha nashim v'alo b'musaf korin arba'ah. The Rambam's assuming they read the Torah at this extra prayer. I only grant that this extra prayer exists when there's actual musaf. It's a day that deserves musaf. And the rule is that if it's a day that there's a musaf, then that day's Torah reading is at very least how many olim? 4 olim. Name me a day when there's musaf in our calendar when we don't read the Torah and there's less than 4 people going up to the Torah. If it's a holiday or Shabbos, there's more than 4 people going up to the Torah. If it's Chol Moed or Rosh Chodesh, there are 4 people go up to the Torah. So that's the Ravad's question here. Why are you telling me 3? If you're talking about a musaf, so I only grant you that there's musaf on a day when there's actual, what you and I know as tefillat musaf, like in every synagogue. And in which case, there should be 4 aliyot. Good question, Ravid. Ela sharvi korei binyano shel yom. Okay? Yeah, the 4th one, Ravid adjust this a little bit. The 3 readings, the 3 aliyot of the Mamad are all taken from Bereshis. Ma'aseh Bereshis, that first chapter of Genesis. If it's Rosh Chodesh and therefore there's a Musaf, so the one who's reading the 4th reading, the 4th Oleh, should read what? Parshas Pinchas. About, Uvrashei Chodshechem Tarkriv Law. And if it's I don't know, if it's the 3rd day of Chol Moed Sukkos, he should read Uvayom HaRevi'i, like we read on the 4th day of Sukkos. Okay? That's what the Ravid says. So you look over here in the Psukim, it says, Shitas Ravid Rashi, Yikurim Rak B'Shachris. Ravid's basically saying, if the Ma'amad are reading the Torah, they're reading at Shachris because there's none of this phantom Musaf prayer that the Rambam's talking about. The Yatera Shemosifim. Uvyamim Sheish Ben Musaf, Yikurim Gam Musaf. Okay? If there's a Musaf, so they could read at Musaf, and then they would do like the Ravid says, read the 3 readings of the Ma'amad from Bereshis, no matter what they, no matter what parsha everybody else is reading, the Ma'amad always reads Parshas Bereshis, no matter what cycle they're following, 3-year cycle or 1-year cycle, and no matter what week of the cycle it is, that's what they read. Okay, so you see here the Ravad disagrees with the Rambam on 2 counts. Okay, first there's the basic idea of is there this extra prayer between Marv and Mincha, between Shachris and Mincha for the Ma'amad, and as a consequence of that, what's the Torah reading, if any? What does it consist of? Okay, so that's the major Rambam Ravid Machlokason on this page. And like I said, we look forward to the reinstitution of the temple service speeding on our days, and we'll have some clarity on this issue. Huh? Yeah, amen. Next. So it says here, "V'kibutzan l'chol tefillah me'arba tefilot elu." This gathering for these 4 tefilot, like I said, Ravid would say 3. Uvamidatan sham l'tfilah l'tchina u'levakasha, and they're standing there in prayer and in supplication. And what's the tefillah and bakasha? Bakasha is requests. Vili kropa Torah, to read the Torah, nikra ma'amad. Interesting, because the Rambam already said the ma'amad. V'hu nikra, he says over here, these people are called the ma'amad. Okay. Earlier you said anshe ma'amad are the people chosen for this job. The guy in charge is called the rosh ma'amad, and that which they do in the synagogue or in the temple is called ma'amad, the assembly. Okay. We have questions on this one? Okay. Let's move on. What do they read? What is the Torah reading for the Ma'amad? Uvamayin Korein. The Maaseh Reshith. They read the act of creation, which is basically known as Genesis 1. But it also includes what's known as Genesis 2. For whatever, those same people decided that there are earlier prophets and later prophets, and the book of Samuel is really two Samuels. The Satmar Rebbe was asked, there's two places ascribed to being the grave of the prophet Samuel. There's the classic one, to be Samuel, and another grave that they say is his. So they asked the Satmar Rebbe, what is it? Well, what's the shot? Two Shmuels? He says, yeah, that's Shmuel Aleph, that's Shmuel Bet. Okay. But seriously, you see that they read basically what's known as the first two chapters of Genesis. And it just goes to show you that whoever was dividing the chapters didn't know what he was doing, because if he had known, he would have put the seventh day, the Sabbath, which is not called Sabbath, by the way, in all of Genesis. It's just called the seventh day, because it's only the Sabbath ones who was giving to the Jews, because the Jews are supposed to be the ones who are desisting from work thereon. Okay. They put these few verses describing the seventh day in the second chapter. And they should have put it in the first chapter. So they read Ma'aseh Bereshis, and they also mention Yehi Rakia. Yehi Rakia refers to that which created on Monday, the second day. So on Sunday, they read about what happened on Sunday and Monday. Basheni, on Monday, they read about Yehi Rakia and Yikawu Hamayim, which is, by the way, what happened on the third day. God basically pushed the waters to one particular place, which we call the world oceans, and allowed the dry land, the continents, to show, so to speak. Bashlishi, on Tuesday, the third day of the week, they read Yikawu Hamayim, what happened on Tuesday, and Wihi Milroth, what happened on Wednesday. Bar-Revi'i, Yehi Milroth, the creation of the luminaries, and Yishritzu Amayim, which is what happened on the fifth day, the Thursday. On Thursday, B'chamishi, Yishritzu Amayim v'totzei aretz. They read what happened on the fifth day, let the waters swarm with creatures, and also let the earth bring forth animals. Basically, the terrestrial animals were created on the sixth day. So on Thursday, we read about the creation of the fifth day and the sixth day. Bashishi, on the sixth day, which would be Friday, they read about Totzei Aretz, what happened in creation on the sixth day, and Waichulu, the description of the seventh day, how God desisted from creating anything and instead rested and sanctified that day. He rested that day and he sanctified that day, whatever that means. What does it mean that God rested? God desisted, God rested, and God sanctified. What's Pshat? Well, I can understand that the world was Vaichulu, means everything was complete. And that says Vaichalu himayamashvim malach Torah sherasa. But even though everything was complete, God Himself also completed something on the seventh day. There was like a Makkah Bepatish on the seventh day. So Chazal talk about that. What was created on the seventh day? What was created at twilight of the seventh day? Right? Yeah, tongs. So you could make other things out of metal. Okay, the mouth of the donkey, etc. This is a very deep idea. Obviously, you can't take these things too literally. There's great ideas hidden in what Chazal said here. That's not the subject tonight. And that says that God rested. What does that mean that God rested? Shavat, and it says Shavat vayinafash, and He was refreshed also. What was Moshe Rabbeinu telling us when God rested, so to speak, and was refreshed, so to speak? Okay, that could be a life, that could be a doctorate. And then it says He sanctified it. What does it mean He sanctified it? That one's the easiest one. It means he set it aside for the Jewish people to keep the commandments thereon, to do like He did. That like I said, that's a relatively easy idea that we could say, so-called easy, but it's not. Understanding what it means that God had a Shabbos, like I said, maybe once we finish these halachas, we'll look into that. Okay, but there's more Nevuchim. There's a lot of Ramban on that. There's so many things you open. The Torah Shlema has, how many pages on this? Okay, There's a lot in Chazal on this. Okay, next. Parasha Gedolah Korinotah B'Shnayim. If it's a big parsha, they can divide among two. What's a big parsha? A parsha that's divisible by two means there's enough psukim in the actual paragraph as it appears in the Sefer Torah, 6 or more psukim, because 6 can be divided at least into 3 or something else. 6 can be divided 3 and 3, and a number greater than 6 can be divided at least one gets 3 and one gets at least 3. Okay, that's parsha Gedolah. Uktana Koreota Echad. If it's a small parsha, so one person has to read it. You can't divide it. Up to 5 psukim can't be divided. Ushtei parashiot shekorin shachris. Okay, these 2 parshas that they read in the morning. Heim shechozrim korinotam b'tfilah shniya b'sefer. They're the same ones that I read, same Torah reading at the second prayer. The second prayer that the Ravad says doesn't exist. V'chozrim korinotan al peh b'mincha. And they're read by heart at mincha. You don't need a Sefer Torah. Wait a minute, if you're so used to it, the heter that exists for mincha, so why can't it exist for shachris and musaf the next day? Question. For example, Kriyas Shema, the heter exists all the time. Because I read Shema yesterday, I read it twice. Thank God, I think I know it well enough. Remember, you learned it as a kid. It's stick with you. Okay, good. It's a question, but we don't have an answer for it right now. Shmonai me Chanukah. What?
There's a comment here. Which says that the cutoff point is 5 and not 6.
Okay, 5, because they say, yes, I was about to talk about the Parsha of Rosh Chodesh. 5 means one guy reads 3, and the next guy reads the last pasuk that the first guy read, and the next 2. Because I'll talk about this. How you divide up, they want to divide up the 8 psukim that talk about Parshas Tamid among 3 aliyahs. How do they do it on Rosh Chodesh? So they say you have to repeat a pasuk. So the Shulchan Aruch understood it, and this the general Jewish practice is, Levi, Kohen reads first 3 psukim, the Levi reads the next 2 psukim plus the last one the Kohen read. What? No, in the order. He reads the Levi reads the last verse the Kohen read, and then the next 2. And then the Yisrael reads the next 3 psukim, plus the next 2 psukim, which are their own parsha, the Shabbos thing. Well, yeah, that's how the Rambam says it. But the Vilna Gaon says, no, the Kohen reads the first 3, the Levi reads the next 3, and the Yisrael reads the next 2, but starts with the last pasuk that the Levi read. The nafkamina between the Shulchan Aruch's general practice that everybody knows and the Vilna Gaon's practice on Rosh Chodesh is, what does the Levi read, basically? Okay, that's how it goes. And I've seen it only. I've only been zoche a few times to see it the Vilna Gaon style. Do they do it in the Or Sameach? In some place, I've been. I remember. Why is this relevant? Because I remember discussing this with Or Sameach, Rabbi Brody, when he is at Netzach, and I was there. I pointed out to him, the Vilna Gaon says, don't read on Rosh Chodesh like the Shulchan Aruch. The Levi reads differently. He doesn't repeat anything. It's the Yisrael repeats after what the Levi said. Says, you said to me, that's the Vilna Gaon's practice? I said, yeah. He's like, well, we tried to do anything like the Vilna Gaon. Go ahead, do it. So that's the way we did it. And also remember Beit Vagan, that's the way they did it. There's a groshul right in the middle of Beit Vagan, the Shtibel and Beit Vagan, that's how they did it. But I've never had to do it. Here they don't do it, and the Sephardim definitely don't do it that way. Okay, but it's the same issue that Josh brought up. If you have not enough psukim to go around, so you divide it up and you repeat a pasuk. The Sephardim also on that Purim reading, the Ashkenazic practice is it's only 9 psukim, 3, 3, 3. So the Sephardim want to make up that 10th pasuk. What do? They read 3, 3, 3, and the last guy to read just repeats the ultimate pasuk. Kiyad al Kesiyah. He just reads it over again, a 10th pasuk. Okay, do you gain anything from doing such a thing? Many would say not. That's why they don't do it. Not worth it. They just stick with what the basic understanding is. 9 psukim in this case. If you can't get a 10th pasuk, what are you gonna do? Read the last pasuk of the previous parsha. You're gonna read the first pasuk of Yisro. It doesn't help.
Wait, where does the 10th pasuk rule come from?
Chazal.
That comes from Chazal. So you have to do it. You have to figure it out.
Yeah, but then they said in Purim, some saying, rule is a rule. And then they say, yeah, but 10th pasuk is in one inyan. In the Parshas Amalek that they read on Purim, which is the last 9 psukim of Shalach, there's no real way to do it. Because you can't take a pasuk from the next parsha, because then you have to read another 3 psukim from the next parsha. You'd have to read the first 3 psukim of Yisro, which are irrelevant. Or you'd have to read the first 3 psukim that precede the whole Amalek thing. The water, the Mei Meriva and Rafidim, which also doesn't really fit. So you're stuck. Okay. Shmonat Yimei Chanukah, Lo Ayu Anshe Mamad Osin Mamad B'Shachris. Hanukkah, they get off of the Mamad in the morning. They don't have to do Mamad in the morning. It's a holiday. By the way, this is obviously a late Second Temple enactment, because it was only the last basically 2 centuries of Second Temple history that they had Hanukkah. V'chol Yom Sheish Bo Korban Musaf. Any day when there's a Korban Musaf, basically the ones mentioned in Pinchas, Lo Ayu Bo Ma'amad Lo B'Tfilah Shniyah Shalem V'Lo B'Mincha. They don't have a Ma'amad at the second one. Basically, they get off of the Musaf. This is the one day that when the Ravid would say there is an extra prayer between Shacharis and Mincha, and not just the Yesera that the Rambam mentions. And now there is none. Okay, V'Lo B'Mincha. If it's a Musaf in the temple, there's just Ma'amad at Shacharis, but not at the Yesera prayer and at Mincha. Ela b'Shachris u'Vinila bivlat. They only have Shacharis and Ne'ilah. V'chol yom she'ah bo korban ha'etzim. By the way, this is a machlokas Tanaim, how this works out. Rabbi Akiva and the other Tanaim, how exactly this works. V'chol yom she'ah bo korban ha'etzim. By the way, you might have it in your dots. Is it with a shuruk or a kamatz? Korban or kurban? Kurban. What's going on there? What's the difference between korban and kurban? There's a patach under the bet, by the way. Okay? What's the difference between korban and kurban? What? Bruh? Nope, it's a noun. It's not a verb. Basically, the word is korban with the kamatz katan. Fine. It's a closed, unaccented syllable with the kamatz, so it's kamatz katan. And 1 or 2 places in Tanakh, it's spelled kurban. A variation, a dialectical variation. And for some reason, it's like Yehoshua bin Nun. Most of the time, the word is ben with a segol, son of, or deserving of. So everybody's ben something or other, and there's like 2 times in Tanakh, it's bin. Bin Hakota Rasha and bin Nun. For whatever reason, they're grammatically equivalent. Sometimes the word is milka, and sometimes malka with a chirik or a patach. Grammatically equivalent. Tefach and tofach are also grammatically equivalent. Rabbi and Rebbe. Okay, they're all Tanuk Tanot. Doesn't really matter which one. So too in this case. So why is it? Because they got used to saying korban in this case. Now, why is it that a kubutz? This is a kubutz. It's not a shuruk. It's the smaller vowel. Shuruk and kamatz katan are interchangeable in many words. For example, when you take the word oz, ayin zayin with cholam, the shorish is ayin zayin zayin. You have a few words in Hebrew like that where it's 2-letter word. The vowel is a cholam, and the shorish is 3 letters. So dovev gives you dove, correct? Give me another example like this. Halal gives you chol. Chol, there's no vav. Okay, secular, there's no vav in chol. That's why the Rambam says. So what do you have? No. Shor is written Malay. Shor, the shorish is shin vav resh. In these cases, the cholam's not part of the shorish. There's no vav there. It's a geminated shorish. Like I said, dalad bet, or like I said, chet lamid lamid. Yeah. Chet kuf chaka chok. So in all these cases, when you have various constructs and contractions, sometimes you get kamatz katan, sometimes you get kubutz. So ozi v'zimrat Hashem is my oz. Sometimes it's uzi. Okay, sometimes it's a kubutz. Either or. When you have kol is from the word kaf lamid, the klal. So kol is never written with the vav. When you have a construct or contraction of kol, sometimes it's the kamatz katan, like kol haaretz, kamatz katan, and sometimes it's kulam with a kubutz. This is across the case. So you have chok and chukam. Okay, chok olam is with the kamatz katan, and chukam, their chok, is with kubutz. So in a lot of these grammatical forms, the kubutz and the kamatz katan are interchangeable, grammatically equivalent, and you can find it. How do you say the chol moed? The Rambam says the chol of the moed is chulo shel moed with a kubutz and a dot in the lamed, always written chaser and always a dot in the next letter, without exception. You guys are familiar with this. Whereas if you have a word like you said, or with an ayin or a vav, or a shor, where the vav is present, then it doesn't get contracted like this. And most of the time, if you have a plural of thereof, it's with an ot. So the plural of a skin is orot. The plural of a kol, a voice, kuf of lamed, is kolot. The plural of or is orot. Okay, that's how you know it. And then you have sometimes when the aleph is in the middle of these nouns, and there's a chulam like zot and nod and rosh. Okay, that's a seglet noun. Really, it should be roesh, but the aleph is in there, like tofach and chodesh. But there's an aleph there, you just lose the next syllable. Okay, zoet, it's just zot, it's contracted. Okay, grammatically equivalent. It's basically a short seglet noun, and that's why there's an aleph in the middle and the silent aleph and a chulam. Wow, these Hebrew stuff, these are great. Okay, so it's basically the same thing. That's the point. Basically, they didn't have when they had a korban eitzim. What is a korban eitzim? They explain. There was no ma'amad at Ne'ilah. Only at Shachris and the second extra prayer, whatever it is, the not musaf of the Rambam, and at Mincha. What's korban eitzim? We'll close with this. Zman kavua haya lemishpachot mishpachot. Hold on, wait a second. I have the word two. Yeah. When let's say la yarim lavi eitzim la ma'aracha. Certain families mentioned in the later biblical books took upon themselves at the beginning of the Second Temple times to provide wood for the temple. Why does the temple need wood? That's the major fuel for the sacrifices. Will a future temple use natural gas? I don't know. V'yom she'agia livnei mishpacha zo lavia eitzim. When that day came, the day they decide, there was a family that used to bring eitzim when? On Tisha B'Av. That was their day. Makrivino lot nedava. They also would bring voluntary burnt offerings. V'zehu korban ha'itzim. That's the korban ha'itzim. The eitzim aren't a korban themselves. Korban ha'itzim means the korban that was brought along with this new supply of wood for the temple. V'haya lahem k'mo yom tov. It was their yom tov. V'asurim bo b'sefer uv'tanit uv'asiyat melacha. So it was for them a day when they couldn't have eulogies, fasts, or doing melacha, like a real yom tov. You make a yom tov, shouldn't do melacha thereon. Rav Kapach points out that there's no such thing as tinus bechoros according to the Rambam. What is tinus bechoros? Firstborn. So you're firstborn? You're firstborn? Okay. Okay. Yeah, okay, fine. Yeah. You don't get a pity on a ben or any of that, the perks. Okay. Well, oh, okay, yeah. Lost out. Anyways, so the Rav Kapach says in the Rambam's world, there's no such thing as a tinus bechoros. Can't be. You know why? If a single family has a whole yontif, they're not allowed to have sefed, tinus, and malacha, because that's the day they used to bring their own family sacrifice. Kal v'chomer, if Am Yisrael has a sacrifice this day, Korban Pesach, you're not allowed to have a fast on the day of Korban Pesach. There's no such thing. The Rambam implicitly does not hold of the minhag of tinus bechoros. Oh, but I read in the other poskim, I saw in the Mishneh Berurah that it says that it's based on Yerushalmi. Rebbe was fasting on Erev Pesach, and he was a Bechor. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was a Bechor. Well, no, but it was the day of Korban Pesach. It's a holiday. It's supposed to be, the Rav Kapach's point is, you're not supposed to have tinus bechoros because it's supposed to be the day that Am Yisrael brings a korban. Just because they're being negligent and not doing it doesn't mean it's not a happy day. So Rebbe was fasting on Erev Pesach. That's what it says. It's explicit in Shas. Rebbe was a firstborn. How you know he's a firstborn? Because he took over the siyut from his father. Okay? Usually the Nasi's firstborn son became the Nasi. So isn't that a Talmudic precedent for tinus bechoros? Answer of the Rambam, implied the Rambam. Men like Rabbi Yehuda Nasi were fasting, not actual fasting like no food and water from dawn until sunset. Ella, it means he was eating a lot less, kedei sheyochal matzah l'te'avon, like it says in the Mishneh. And the Rambam actually has it, not like the Tosafist, not like the Shulchan Aruch and others who say you shouldn't have a meal Erev Pesach afternoon so that you keep matzah b'te'avon. The Rambam says the Hasidim would starve themselves Erev Pesach so they could eat matzah b'te'avon. It doesn't mean strict fast. It means they had breakfast, but after that, they were eating intentionally a lot less than they're used to so that they eat matzah b'te'avon. But according to the Rambam, there's no such thing as a tinus bechoros or fasting on any day that's supposed to be a happy day when they're supposed to be a sacrifice in the temple. God willing, we should see this rebuilt speeding in our days. Guys at home, if you have any comments or questions, send them along. I don't see anything in the chat currently. Oh, there's one in the chat. Hold on. We'll address it. Yeah, same question for Euros Kodesh. Yeah, we talked about that. Okay, so have a good night and Shabbat Shalom and Gemar Tov.
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. If you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.